Good afternoon and welcome to The Appeal Live, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Alana Sivan, and today we're going to be talking about the fight to halt evictions and protect people from housing insecurity in Kansas City. So earlier this month, Anthony Stinson answered a knock on the door of his Kansas City apartment to find a group of sheriff's deputies telling him that he needed to vacate the premises immediately. They gave him a few minutes to pack his personal belongings and to take his two children, ages 2 and 10, out into the freezing rain to find somewhere to stay. This is a picture of Mr. Stinson. Now, all of this came as a surprise to him, according to KC Tenants, a local tenants' rights organization. Mr. Stinson knew that he was behind on rent. And like so many others, when the pandemic hit, he had to step away from work so that he could take care of his children. And so with no reliable source of income, there was simply no way for him to be able to keep up with his bills. But when a notice to vacate appeared on his door, he assumed that there must have been a mistake. And that's because the summons wasn't even issued to him. It was issued to a Jane Doe, not Anthony Stinson. So even with a CDC evictions moratorium in place, he couldn't even fight this one in court because he was never served with a summons in the first place. Now, his story is far from unique, and we'll pull up some studies to show you that. Since the beginning of the pandemic, landlords in just 5 states had filed for nearly 250,000 evictions. And that's according to data collected by the Eviction Lab. And again, that's just data from 5 states, so that's just a tiny snapshot of the problem. There's also a study by the Aspen Institute, which found that between 30 and 40 million people across the country could face eviction in the coming months. And evictions are already fueling COVID infections across the country and COVID deaths, as so many people are being forced out of their homes and forced to stay in shelters on the streets, in congregate settings, couch surfing locations, which all creates an environment where the COVID-19 is more likely to spread. And the eviction machine is firing on all cylinders in Kansas City, where Stinson lives. Thousands of evictions have been filed in Missouri during the pandemic, and hundreds of tenants in the Kansas City area are facing a near constant threat of being forcibly removed from their homes. Organizers with KC Tenants have been doing their best to halt evictions. They've been demonstrating outside county courthouses and successfully blocking hundreds of eviction hearings from proceeding. But this is really only a temporary solution. Eviction moratoriums at both the local and national level have already failed to protect so many people in Kansas City like Mr. Stinson. And even the meager protections that the moratoriums offer will lapse once these policies expire. And so these issues are only going to get worse with time. And rent payments are going to pile up, the winter is going to get colder, and renters will have no way to pay back the money that they owe. And so my guest today is working overtime to keep this crisis from boiling over into catastrophe. Tara Raghuveer is the founding director of KC Tenants and also the director of a campaign for a national homes guarantee. And we're so excited to have her today. Tara, thank you so much for joining The Appeal Live.
Thanks so much, Alana.
So I want to start by asking a few questions about Anthony Stinson's situation and how it came about. I mean, it seems like there should have been so many mechanisms to protect him. We have the CDC's federal moratorium, which was still in place. President Biden's new CDC director recently extended that moratorium through March. And I also understand that there are some sorts of protections at the local level as well. So what happened here?
So in Kansas City, unfortunately, eviction courts have been open since June, and judges have been hearing evictions both in person in the courthouse and online through remote proceedings. And either way you slice it, people are in a lot of pain, and the courts are now becoming agents of this kind of violence during a period of time when, of course, people need to be able to stay at home in order to protect themselves and their neighbors from a deadly virus. So in Anthony Stinson's case, he never never got an eviction summons, right? His landlord filed an eviction against him. But as you can see in the court's website online, the summons was actually not delivered to an Anthony Stinson. It was delivered to a Jane Doe. The trouble is, Anthony doesn't live with any adult woman who could have answered for that summons. He lives with his young daughter and a young son, and they are not legally allowed to respond to that summons. So we have no idea what happened to that summons, but the point is Anthony didn't get it and therefore didn't know that he was being taken to eviction court until a notice to a notice to vacate appeared on his door just last month. And 2 days later, the notice appeared on a Monday. 2 days later, the civil process deputies from the courthouse showed up to lock him out, as you described. And Anthony luckily was able to go back and get his belongings afterwards, but he is unique in that, right? Most people get locked out at that instance and then are forced to live on the streets, pay money to live in a hotel, move in with friends or family, move into congregant shelters, and they don't have the opportunity to go get their belongings, their medication, or anything else. And unfortunately, his is among many stories we've heard from tenants who are caught up in this system that is always unjust, always violent, and especially so now during this pandemic.
So what's happening with his case right now?
So Anthony actually just called me this morning. I'm glad that you all are featuring his story, because he called me this morning to tell me he's still staying in a hotel where he's paying over $45 a night to be unhoused, right? And while he's gotten his stuff back, he has no prospects in terms of a future place to live, because now he has an eviction on his record from very recently, and landlords in Kansas City and the surrounding areas are discriminating against people who have these recent evictions because they don't have the money to pay down the rental debt that they owe through that eviction judgment that came down, nor do they have the money to pay for a security deposit. So Anthony called me this morning and laughed on the phone because he said, they'll all take my application fee, but they won't call me back because I have this eviction on my record, and so I can't find a place to live.
Immediately out of their homes. They're also making it so that people are unhoused for lengthy periods of time. So let's talk about what needs to be done to make sure that Stinson and countless other tenants in similar situations remain housed. Is there any hope for state or local action that could achieve this?
Well, at the local level, what we know is that our presiding judge of our county circuit court absolutely has the authority to end evictions. In fact, we are in the midst of a zero eviction January campaign that was aimed at achieving zero evictions in January. I'm very happy to report that through KC Tenants direct actions, we've helped to stop about 95% of the evictions that were scheduled to be heard and executed this month. And that was through direct action in the first week of January. And then on January 8th, civil process deputies from our county court shot a man 3 times while they tried to evict him, right? And that evening, we took immediate action. We went to the presiding judge's home with over 100 people, and we demanded an immediate end to not just the obvious brutal violence that occurred that day, but also the daily mundane violence of evictions that occur every day through the county courts. And the next Monday, we won the most comprehensive moratorium that we've ever had in Jackson County. The trouble was, it only lasted for 2 weeks. So the judge showed us that he has the authority to end evictions because he did it 2 weeks ago. He ended eviction summons, hearings, and writs of execution. But he allowed that order to expire this past Sunday. So tomorrow, there are 150 evictions on the docket in Jackson County, Missouri, and we are forced yet again to show up and put our bodies on the line to try to stop them. What we need at the local level is the same thing we need at the federal level, which is a full eviction moratorium that goes way beyond the CDC order and stopped all eviction filings, hearings, judgments, and writs of execution. And that doesn't end on an arbitrary date because we don't know when this pandemic will be ending.
And it sounds like you really need all of these actions, but particularly federal intervention like yesterday. And I know KC Tenants has been pushing for a broader response at that level. Can you talk a little bit about what lobbying has looked like in that area and where it stands now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because our critics locally think that all we do is show up and protest when actually, of course, there is a much more sophisticated strategy than just that. While we've taken this month of direct actions, we also have 25 leaders on the doors of apartments across Kansas City every Saturday morning, educating people about the existing CDC order so that they can seek protection. We've knocked on 15,000 doors since the beginning of September to make sure people know about what protections exist. And then meanwhile, of course, we're also taking action to try to elevate our struggle to the federal level because we don't have a lot of hope, unfortunately, that our local or state leaders will take the appropriate action that working people need in order to be protected right now. So at the federal level, we're lucky to be represented by Representative Emanuel Cleaver, who as of yesterday is the incoming subcommittee chair for the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee on the House Financial Services Committee. And it is our hope that Representative Cleaver, due to the pressure mounted by KC Tenants, will take the action in Congress in his position of leadership that's needed, not only to pass a more comprehensive eviction moratorium as soon as possible, but also to cancel rents and mortgage payments and all of the rental debt that's accrued for the last 9-10 months that's going to financially ruin people like Anthony Stinson if we don't account for that as well.
So let's also move back to the local discussion. There's a mayoral race coming up in Kansas City, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how housing has emerged as an important issue in that race. Can you explain how candidates are talking about housing and insecurity and other issues regarding people who are unhoused?
So the mayoral race in Kansas City isn't until 2023. In St. Louis, they've got one coming up this year. But of course, 2023 in some ways is actually around the corner. KC Tenants staged a major intervention in the last mayoral race in 2019. It was at the very beginning of our organizing here, and our project was to make housing the key issue in the municipal election. When we started organizing, people were talking about trash and potholes, and that's pretty much it. And then when we were done organizing, housing really was the key issue. We elected a mayor who made commitments to be a champion for tenants, some of which have been kept and some of which haven't. And we have monthly meetings with that mayor to hold him accountable for the promises that he makes to KC Tenants and to tenants across the city. The next time around when we have these elections, both for mayor and city council, our hope is that we have people from our base running for those positions. It's not just a matter of the people who are going to run using the right talking points. We want poor and working class people to actually be assuming these positions of power that are so important in governing our lives.
So let's zoom out and talk a little bit about the issue of housing security more broadly. So we've been talking mainly about what needs to be done to respond to this as an acute crisis. But, as you've said more than once, this is a massive problem that existed long before the pandemic and that will exist well after the pandemic. So how did we get here, and what needs to be done at a structural level to address the housing crisis? And if you want to plug your home's guarantee, feel free.
Yeah, so there's a much, much longer story to tell here about an American housing and land system that's built on centuries of racial capitalism, right? When we train on this in our tenant meetings, we have to start all the way at the beginning. It's a story of the theft of land. It's a story of property law being written by white slave-owning men. And it's a story about things like the GI Bill, policies that wrote into law wealth inequality in this country in a way that is really impossible at this point to adequately repair without complete systemic overhaul, right? So the history of racial capitalism is one that we have to understand when we think about a path forward. And the pandemic period has offered us such clarity on the failure when we recognize housing as a commodity. We treat housing as a commodity as opposed to guaranteeing housing as a public good or a human right. There is no time in history where it's been more clear that that is a failed model than the last 10 months, right? People needed to stay home in order to stay healthy. Communities needed their neighbors to stay home in order to stay healthy. This is not just an individual, want or sort of luxury. This is something that we all rely on for our personal safety and for our community safety. And we failed, right? Places like my hometown, Kansas City, had kicked people into the streets when our emergency rooms and our ICUs were filled with COVID patients, right? Right now, I know a woman named Cassandra Conrad who is so sick so sick with COVID, and she's already received a notice to vacate. It's a matter of hours or days before the deputies show up at her doors, and she'll be on the streets with an active case of COVID, right? So the ultimate problem here is that we think of housing as a commodity instead of guaranteeing housing as a public good. And we have a vision for a way in which we need to move in the other direction, which is to guarantee homes for everyone who needs them. It's the homes guarantee. And our hope is that this is the moment, if not any other moment, this is the moment that we start taking that premise really seriously, and that our champions in Congress start forging a new and better way forward.
So let's talk more about the homes guarantee. What does it entail? And also, what sort of traction are you seeing in your lobbying efforts around it?
So the homes guarantee seeks to build 12 million units of social housing, that is housing that would be permanently off of the private market and not available for speculation. 12 million was the number we came up with in 2019. Probably needs to be something in the order of 30 million or 50 million at this point to account for all of the kind of economic devastation that we've seen since that time. A homes guarantee also includes a massive reinvestment in existing public housing, which is dilapidated and been neglected by this kind of conspiracy of the profiteers that's told us that we need to defund public programs so that we can reallocate resources to the private market. A homes guarantee includes a tenant's bill of rights that must include universal rent control, a tenant's opportunity to purchase, good cause eviction protections. And then importantly, a homes guarantee should be one among many platforms for reparations, right? We need to account for this history, this, gross, horrible legacy of racial injustice that's really baked into our housing and land policies in this country. And that needs to look like literal reparations through our housing and land policies, land back to Native communities, and wealth redistribution to the communities that were cut out of those opportunities through racist policies that excluded primarily Black communities from building the kind of wealth that white communities did in the U.S.
So do you have any advice for people who are in situations like Stinson's? So people who are behind on rent payments and concerned about whether they'll be evicted?
My main advice at this point is to find a way to organize and fight back. Anthony Stinson was able to get his belongings out of his home the week after his eviction because he found KC Tenants. He showed up to take a direct action with us on Tuesday, January 12th. We went to the Office of Civil Process and we started banging on the doors, and we didn't leave until they sent someone down to negotiate with us. And that was where we cut the deal for Anthony to get to go back the next day and retrieve his belongings. If not for that direct action, Anthony would be stuck in a hotel without his medication, without his kids' backpacks, without any of their Christmas presents, none of the things that they had in their apartment that had gotten locked there by the deputy. So it's only through direct action that we've seen any progress in the last couple of months. It's only through, joining together and blockading court doors that we've delayed evictions. It's only through organizing hundreds of people to show up at the homes of judges that we've won partial moratoriums. We tried organizing through all of the proper routes, right? We tried writing letters, we tried holding vigils, we tried, working through politicians locally for about 8 months before we decided that we had had enough. Right. And by we, I mean not me, but the leaders in our base, like Anthony, who are impacted by these systems of violence. They decided we have had enough. Right. And they decided that it's time, if we don't get it, we have to shut it down. So that's kind of the mode that we're in right now, is shut it down mode. And that's not because we're bloodthirsty. It's not because we take action for action's sake or, this stuff is fun. It's because those are the means that are left for us. And that's kind of the only thing that someone like Anthony can do in a city like ours at this point is to stand up and try his best to fight back, because there really aren't any institutions outside of organizing groups that are fighting for him right now.
Well, thank you so much, Tara, for all the work that you've been doing and for all the work that KC Tenants has been doing. If folks want to get involved, Tara, how can they get involved?
If you are local to Kansas City or you're an ally around the country, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at KC Tenants. Send us a message and we'll plug you in. We have actually channeled a lot of energy and organizing from people outside of Kansas City through our virtual court disruptions in the last several months. So hit us up on that front. And if folks are interested in joining the Homes Guarantee team, you can similarly find us on the internet. Homesguarantee.com is the place where you can engage with us, read the platform, and reach out to get involved.
Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure having you.
Thanks so much, Alana.
So as authorities in Kansas City are sweeping residents out of their homes and into the streets in a wave of eviction that has continued despite this pandemic, groups like KC Tenants are working to keep people in their homes, but they cannot do this work alone. We need swift action from government officials to halt evictions, cancel rents, stop homeless sweeps, provide better services and resources for people who are unhoused. And that's what so many people are fighting to do, like Tara. So a huge thanks to all of the impacted folks who are doing this work. And thanks to all of you for watching. You can continue following the latest news on the Appeal Live by following the Appeal on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Alana Sivin. See you next time.